Well, these have been a bleak few years for the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. First, during the first administration of Donald Trump, through the conversion of the Senate Judiciary Committee into a rubber stamp for the confirmation of extremist judicial nominees and executive branch nominees chosen by dark money special interests for the advancement of their agenda through the courts. Then, under President Biden's administration, through the Judiciary Committee's frankly, failure to hold to account Supreme Court justices that had engaged in unprecedented law-breaking, conflicts of interest, and corruption. But now, perhaps, the Senate Judiciary Committee has reached its lowest ebb with this week the confirmation of Emil Bove, President Trump's personal lawyer, a man who has been described as a henchman, who has now been confirmed by Senate Republicans under the leadership of Chuck Grassley and the Senate Judiciary Committee to a life tenured position on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. This was a confirmation that was passed through the Senate under a cloud of controversy with credible and corroborated whistleblower allegations made against this nominee.
He is about as unfit and unqualified as any judicial nominee to come before this body in my 15 years here. We're here not only on the merits of Mr. Bove, but also because we were denied an opportunity in the committee to present fairly and fully our case against Mr. Bove based on the record. And we were denied an opportunity to elicit from the Department of Justice and the administration the facts that are necessary to evaluate his nomination. We were denied the opportunity to have a whistleblower come before the committee, a whistleblower who bravely came forward with facts showing how Mr. Bove suggested, indeed urged, that lawful court orders be disobeyed, that the Department of Justice ought to tell the courts to F themselves.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, we are so thrilled to have you join us today. You have been on the front lines of this fight in the Senate Judiciary Committee over the last decade against this assault on the rule of law. Of Bove's confirmation, you tweeted this week, "A dark day for the Senate and the country. Confirmation of Emil Bove as a federal appellate judge. Unfit and unqualified, he was rushed to a vote by Republicans who refused to hear whistleblower testimony or demand DOJ files. Reckless and reprehensible." Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you for joining us here on Midas Touch Legal AF. We are also thrilled to be joined by your former chief of staff, our senior advisor at Court Accountability, my dear friend and partner, Laurie Rubiner. A dark day indeed. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, thank you for joining us. What should we all make of this confirmation this week of Emil Bove?
I am frustrated and angry beyond words by the failing of the Judiciary Committee, but of the Senate as a whole, attributable directly to Republicans' failure to show some backbone and spine. You mentioned the whistleblower. Let me come right to the point. There was a credible whistleblower who challenged Bove's honesty before our committee, put aside his unethical work at the Department of Justice, his violation of basic norms as a prosecutor. He was the subject of or involved in a investigation of the Office of Professional Responsibility. We were denied knowledge of that investigation. We were denied the opportunity to present the whistleblower at a hearing, and additional whistleblowers came forward willing to talk to my colleagues. They would have none of it. In other words, they had access and opportunity to gain more information about Bove, and they turned away. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to see it. That's a violation of basic responsibility as a member of the United States Senate. And I am disappointed in Republican colleagues who are in thrall or in fear of Donald Trump. The culture of intimidation, bullying, has reached a low point, and it has been a dark day. And if I just take one of my colleagues in particular, Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the committee, has been a champion of whistleblowers until now. He wrote laws, and I joined with him in advocating improvements to those laws that protected whistleblowers more effectively. And now he has essentially turned his back on a whistleblower who had credible, vitally important information that goes to the unfitness, and I really mean unfitness, of Emil Bove to serve on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and as you well know, potentially on the United States Supreme Court, because he's been mentioned as a possible candidate for the Supreme Court. So what I can tell you is that I'm more determined than ever to fight. We're going to use blue slips. I haven't been a fan of blue slips, but we're going to use them. We're going to use hearings. We're going to use whistleblowers. We'll encourage them to come forward, and we'll find innovative means of using whistleblowers without threatening their identity or reputations. I think we're up against a threat to our democracy in literally corrupting the judicial branch. And you've done great work, Alex and Laurie, on dark money. That is very much a part of the present confirmation process, the impact of money and improper influence on the part of a very small part of our population. It was the Federalist Society. The president no longer likes the Federalist Society. He's attacked it. He's called Leonard Leo a sleaze, but he's still using a very small group of advisors who have in mind.
Indeed. And it appears actually that the rumors of the demise of the Federalist Society's influence might be exaggerated, because we've got other nominees like this guy, Josh Devine, who had a position much like the one I had for Senator Whitehouse. For Josh Hawley, he's a 34-year-old just confirmed to a life tenure district court seat out of Missouri. He worked for Josh Hawley and basically has made his career as an anti-abortion zealot, very clearly in the mold of the types of nominees that Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society were picking in the first Trump administration. Laurie, you've done so much work in the field of reproductive freedom and access to reproductive health care. What do you make of the continued confirmation and emphasis of anti-abortion zealots, even as we get this new mold of judge like Bove, who is, I think, very much in the model of a kind of Alicia Cannon Trump henchman? They're very much to advance Trump's own personal agenda. It seems like there's still room in this right-wing legal apparatus for the advancement of movement soldiers like Josh Devine.
Well, and Josh Devine, as the senator knows, has been a real is really moving toward trying to ban mifepristone. That's the next big step in the anti-abortion machine, is to get rid of medication abortion, because, of course, that's what still allows many women access to legal and safe abortion. And I have to say, I was so proud to work for Senator Blumenthal, because he's been such a stalwart advocate for safe and legal abortion and reproductive rights for women throughout his career. And it was such an honor to work with him and for him in his office. He was the author of the Women's Health Protection Act, which I believe every Democrat, except for maybe one, supported. He was one of the few in the party who foresaw what was happening and with that bill, and saw that Roe was going to be overturned. As a former Supreme Court clerk, he understood what was happening, and so introduced that bill, trying to preserve access to abortion in some of these states where states were chipping away at Roe, because he saw that happening. And I guess, I don't know, Senator, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about these issues and what we see as the next steps. And I think we all know on this call that the anti-abortion advocacy machine is not done with Roe. Roe is not the end. Roe is just the beginning, and they have a lot more things. They have a lot more that they've set their sights on. And that's why we were so disturbed to see Josh Devine confirmed so easily. I guess I don't know, Senator, what are your thoughts about how we can prevent some of the really, the next phase of sort of Dobbs 2.0, I guess is the way I look at it.
I think that groups that have mobilized, have been enormously effective. You know well from your own work at Planned Parenthood and other groups as a leader of this movement. It is a movement now. And there are fanatics. Josh Devine is one of them. I spoke on the Senate floor about him. We had a group of senators go to the floor and speak on Bove. I organized them to do it. But I urged them to do, as I did, talk about Josh Devine as well, because district court judges can do enormous harm. And that's why we need to, in effect, mobilize our community to put pressure on senators from red as well as blue states, because our community isn't limited to blue states. And in some ways, the victims of this cruel and stupid policy, and it is both cruel and it is stupid, as we all know, women not only deserve morally to make decisions about when and whether to have children, but also it makes sense for our society not to have children brought into this world when there are not caring parents ready and eager to have them. So I think that we have to mobilize, go to the streets, go to elections, make it count, put it on the ballot. There's no easy one solution here. And, I think of Cecile all the time, our great friend, whose passing was so devastating to all of us, and her sense of joy and hope in this fight, as dark and bleak, to use your word, Alex, as it often seems, and it does to me. We need to attract young people to know that they can make a difference, and that this cause ought to be one of the very number one priorities. And I will just say, the pollsters will tell you people are concerned about prices, groceries, gas. They're concerned maybe about this Epstein controversy, but we have to put reproductive freedoms on the ballot. And by the way, about Josh Devine, he is not only a zealot when it comes to his opposition to reproductive freedom, he's also very severely against LGBTQ plus rights as well. So there is a common kind of through line with many of these judicial nominees that is really repugnant.
Senator, I really appreciate you saying how important it is to continue to fight for reproductive rights when people have shifted their focus to economic issues. Because I think you are always one of those people, no matter what, who has always said this is an issue of humanity, but also understand that this is also an issue about economic well-being. And so I'm very grateful for your always thinking about it beyond just, this is not just a women's issue, this is an issue about humanity. So I'm very grateful for your ability to articulate it that way.
Well, women's rights are human rights. Women's health care is all of our health care. And what the Republican majority is doing, for example, on Medicaid, what it's doing for premium health care credits, what it's doing to eliminate quality health care, goes directly to reproductive freedoms, because that's health care. And we need to emphasize that, as you just put it so well, reproductive freedoms also have economic impacts in our society. And when we deny women the right to control their own bodies, it's about their economic futures as well, about being productive in the workplace, about education and training. It has ramifications beyond just the potential legislation that's out there that is so repressive.
Senator, in addition to being an economic issue, we also think about abortion very much as a democracy issue, and the divine confirmation and the anti-abortion movement's legal agenda to first overturn Roe and now to continue to advance towards fetal personhood and the constitutionalization of fetal rights to ban abortion nationwide. They have really fostered a legal movement to advance that agenda that we really have not been able to match. And it's just one example of the ways in which the right-wing legal movement has been able to manipulate the law and the Constitution itself to frustrate democratic outcomes, the preferred policy preferences of the majority of Americans. And it strikes me that, zooming out a little bit, thinking about how deeply unpopular so much of what Trump is doing is, how deeply unpopular with so much of what the courts and the Federalist Society judges are doing is that this was the point, right? It was the installation of these judges to advance deeply unpopular policy outcomes, which structurally have the effect of disempowering Congress. And unfortunately, so many of your Republican colleagues have been willing to give away Congress's power, the people's power, to these special interests and towards this project of entrenchment of constitutional power in the courts and in the executive branch. What can Congress do? What can we organize to get a community like we have built around Midas Touch, Legal AF, to get Congress to get off of its kind of back foot and start fighting these fights on their terms? Because that's what it strikes me as. It's like most Americans don't want these outcomes, but we can't get to what we want collectively because these justices and judges and now the executive branch, which decides that it gets to just decide the meaning of the Constitution because they all say otherwise, and we're all just stuck like this. But that doesn't seem like democracy. So how can we actually start to move toward the results we want to see in the world? Maybe that's a big question. Sorry.
It's a big question, but it's a very critical one. And first, to just emphasize your point, the Federalist Society was part of a very purposeful and unrelenting effort to change the face and voice of the federal bench. They planned for years. They worked for decades, literally. We mentioned earlier that the president seems perhaps out of love with the Federalist Society, but he is still taking orders. He has no independent views of his own on who should be nominated to the federal bench. He's listening to people who were schooled by the Federalist Society, even though they may not be leaders now. And they purposefully and unrelentingly built a bench of potential nominees. You know the history. And they also worked through dark money, through contributors who went to candidates, as they did to Donald Trump, and told him that the price of their support was that he would nominate anti-Roe candidates, in other words, candidates who were pledged to overturn Roe at every level of the federal bench: district court judges, appellate court judges, United States Supreme Court justices. And so we need the same kind of focus and unrelenting, purposeful work. And that's what I'm committed to do. Now, second, what do we need to do? Well, elections have consequences, to quote the old maxim, and we need to be prepared for this next election. I know that for many people, a Democratic majority in the Senate seems like a futile hope or a very uphill battle, but I'm encouraged because Roy Cooper in North Carolina, the unpopularity of a couple of other incumbents in Maine and elsewhere, the prospects in Ohio, if Sherrod Brown decides to run again, I think that we are potentially in a world where there are major changes in the Senate that enable us to fight back. And I think we need to, in the meantime, resort to every tactic, every tool that we have available. I mentioned blue slips, but any kind of tactic to display or dramatize the truth about these nominees, to embarrass our Senate colleagues. Because here is the other point that I think is very important. I mentioned earlier. They have no backbone. They're in fear of primaries that Donald Trump threatens. They're in the Trump cult. Whatever the reason, they have failed to demonstrate any independence. And both of you who have worked in the Senate know that there's a tradition of senators standing up to presidents. I did it when we had a Democratic president, Barack Obama. I led the effort to overturn one of his vetoes on a jurisdictional legislative proposal that enabled the 9/11 families to sue Saudi Arabia and other countries that may have been responsible for that tragedy. So standing up to presidents is something we do in the United States Senate. It's part of our tradition, but it's been lost by my Republican colleagues. And I think the more that we can support and shame, the combination of the two, our colleagues, the more effective we can be. But in the meantime, we need to know that we're in the fight of our lives because we're fighting for America's life.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you so much for leading these fights, for your time joining us here on Court Accountability Action with Midas Touch Legal AF. Thank you, Laurie Rubiner, our senior advisor, for joining us. Until next time, don't forget, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty. I'm Alex Aronson, signing off.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.